But when you look at war, what's happening now is a war for the planet. Now, this is an old war. It's been going on a long time, since biblical days. They're shutting out the lights on a lot of the food production. When the music stops, there's just not going to be enough caloric chairs, right? There's not going to be enough nutrition.
That used to be oases out there that had forests and fields, and now it's all just dry desert. So you can see the climatological shifts over multi-millennia as well. And you just have to wonder if one of these climatological shifts is back again that would disrupt food production, and there would have to be an excuse for decreased crop yields. And boom, lo and behold, we have an excuse for decreased crop yields.
The reason we were in Norway and Sweden is because we were looking at the Baltic. We were in Denmark because we're looking at the Danish Strait, which I think that will close, right? We were in Hamburg because it's the biggest port in Germany, the third biggest in Europe, because I think something will end up happening to Hamburg, right? And likewise at Rotterdam. That's why I've talked about Rotterdam and Antwerp. I think these will all be targeted, and just like Okinawa, where I was just at again. When China goes for Formosa, when it goes for Taiwan, they're going to go for you got to go for Okinawa.
What could cause such a massive shift in climate on something on the multi-thousand year that would turn forests into deserts? Solar activity is probably the only thing that you could think of. Good afternoon, everyone. I know everybody's just searching the internet looking for more information on this by-the-minute event that's going on in Iran. Today I have with me Michael Yon, and geopolitical analyst, talking about fertilizer as well, the disruptions in food that are inbound. A lot of other things that are going to affect our lives, like the disruption in helium for any types of consumer electronics and semiconductor chips. Plastics are being affected. All these plants are going to roll back to minimum production to try to conserve what they have. We're going to have the disruption from the food to the cattle industry, and then from the cattle to the meat and dairy industry. But the big elephant in the room, as well as plastics, the disruption, like how do we package our foods and then move them to the final markets where we buy them and save all this. And, that little quote that they kept saying, short-term pain for long-term gain. I have a new one here off Yahoo Finance, a very painful energy transition. That's a big step from short-term pain to very painful energy transition over a long term. Interesting ideas here. So Michael, thank you for joining me. Start where you like, because there's just so many things to go through. It's occurring at just such a rapid pace. And just an FYI, he and I are both out here in Asia in different countries looking at it on the ground. So, everybody, please enjoy. We're about to talk about, share your comments. Please share this video with others so we can keep the conversation going and get bright minds involved in this conversation, because we're going to have to solve more problems.
I'm glad you're in Asia, because as you know, you can't really know what's happening in your country often until you go outside and look back in. You go away from your house and look back and look, how does my house look from a distance, right? And so yeah, and in fact, for those watching your show now who've never heard of me before, I'm American. I grew up in the United States. I was in the U.S. Army, that sort of thing. Then I spent most of my life overseas in over 100 countries now. So I've been all over the United States, though. I went to school in California. I grew up in Florida. I went to school. I had a business in Ohio. I had a business in North Carolina. I lived in Massachusetts. I've been all over the United States. I now have a sort of a base camp, you might say, in Texas, where I'm at pretty often. And this is my library in Japan, right? And so this is not a green screen. These are actually my library. Home is where your library is. But so we just got back from 3 months in Europe, and Masako, my wife, and I, and we stayed for a month of that time with Catherine Austin Fitz in Netherlands. We were there because Netherlands is so key to this story, right? And quite a lot. And so anyway, let's get to the bottom line. I watch your show quite a lot. I have for years. I've mentioned you many times on my interviews for probably 4 years, I guess, something like that. I don't know when I first started following you, but it was four. When did you start your show anyway?
2014, but then I joined with Mike Adams for a while over in his channel and his studio and his network over there, and that was a few years back.
And I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It's hard to get on my to watch list. I started paying attention, and so and you have a special way of looking at things that has turned out to be accurate. That's the bottom line. Is I don't care about everything else. Does it turn out to be accurate or not accurate? I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Do you hit the dartboard or not? And you're hitting it. So I'm very interested to hear like right now. You're saying we're in the country you're at. I'm in Japan.
The copper supply chain is breaking, and that's a defense problem. Every radar system, power grid, data center, weapons platform, and secure communications network depends on copper. While the mainstream media sleeps, the U.S. government is moving under emergency authorities to lock down domestic supply. And if you understand how modern defense and infrastructure work, you already know where this is heading. The government just issued a direct order, immediate measures to increase American mineral production. They specifically named the Palmer Project in Alaska as a priority. This isn't wishful thinking, it's a White House directive. Vizsla Copper owns 100% of the Palmer Project, an asset believed to host in-ground value in the billions of copper, zinc, and critical minerals. The government is signing, we need domestic supply, and we need it now. Vizsla Copper acquired Palmer last year when I first featured them, and since then the story has only strengthened. Now they have the full backing of the Alaskan governor, and with Trump announcing a proposed $12 billion U.S. strategic critical mineral reserve, the timing couldn't be better. Backed by the same team that built Vizsla Silver into a billion-dollar company, they're not guessing, they're executing. They control millions of pounds of copper at their flagship property, and now they've positioned directly inside America's critical mineral strategy. When the government names your project a solution, that's not luck, that's positioning. Here's what matters. Owning physical, government-backed domestic mineral supply is one of the most direct ways to prepare for what's coming. When supply chains tighten, and they will, the assets sitting in the ground with government backing are what hold value. Other Alaskan projects with this level of support moved over 200%. Vizsla Copper trades under the ticker VCUFF in the US and VCU.V in Canada, and is now the focal point of America's copper solution. Do your own research. Thanks to Vizsla Copper Corp for sponsoring today's video. You can get their latest presentation here on their website, VizslaInvestorDeck.com/ADAPT2030. Vizsla Copper Corp. Check out the possibilities. That's Vizsla-investor-deck.com/ADAPT2030. Click on that link in the description box below.
I think they're going to end up with a terrible energy problem here. But at the moment, it's actually not obvious. Like there's no long lines. I see these things like, they're all lined up here and getting gas and all that. Actually, they're not. And actually the prices, like I've been sending you some photos, the prices have actually weirdly been dropping. Now they're higher than they were since before the initial February 28th, but they are, but they're going down. Actually, they're drop down. Japan is tapping into a strategic reserve, but I don't know all the mechanisms that are causing this because how much are they getting from other places like Russia? I just don't know. But one thing's for sure, and this is important. I see a lot of very smart people out there that are doing analysis, but they've got their substantial computers, their brains, working under paradigms that are untrue. So basically, you got a really great mainframe computer going there, but you don't actually understand what the crocodile's doing. In fact, you think the crocodile is a deer. It's like for instance, the idea, for instance, that we're doing this because Iran killed 30,000 people. Okay, let's go back to first principles. Who told us that Iran killed 30,000 people? The same people that told us about a lot of things that were abject lies. Anyway, these lies, they just stack up over and over and over. But this has nothing to do with Iran cracking down on people. That's the emotional thing that you hear people repeating and repeating. Every war you've ever heard of is about three things, period, full stop. They are about routes, resources, and ideology. Sometimes it's just the war will be just about some route. Sometimes it's about some resource. Sometimes it's about ideology. And ideology is about human resources, actually. So, but sometimes it's about all three at once. Now we've got all three at once in sharp relief. Israel, Hormuz, all these places, these are a stack of the most important places on earth, right? I spend a lot of time in Panama, about a year in the last 5 years, actually, and because it's so important. But as important as Panama is, which is very important, Hormuz is a lot more important, and Israel is extremely important. Israel only exists because Suez Canal opened in 1869. It was created to actually to gain control of the Suez Canal. Actually, this is a share warrant from 1899 that I actually bought in an antique store. In it was not even in this. I had to go get this plastic to save it. And this is a share warrant to make Israel the the Jewish Colonial Trust. You see that right here? Whose name is right here? Theodore Herzl, right? I've actually got Theodore Herzl's original books right here, right? I mean, I got a whole section on this, on why Israel even exists. It exists for the same reason Panama exists. Israel exists because ideology was weaponized to get control of that Suez Canal. When the Suez Canal opened in 1869, it was the spinal cord of the British Empire, is what people called it at that time, right? And the British were very worried. They're like, Egypt's going to take the canal. Some of the thinkers were, and some people are like, nah, Egypt's not going to take the canal. We're the British, and Egypt took the canal. And so, but at the end of the day, the British intelligence they used Zionists to create Israel to get control of that canal. This is an old form of warfare. It's like well described. It's not conspiracy theory. It's as common in war as bows and arrows and rifles, right? You know what I mean? This is like normal war, actually. My whole library is a war library. There's not a single book here on guns. It's all about demographic warfare, information warfare, intoxicants in warfare, music in warfare, museums in warfare. It's all about very high level warfare, routes and resources, anthropological warfare, right? The high level, the real high level, all these Navy SEAL movies and Green Beret movies, that's like plumber level when we're talking about constructing an entire country, right? Everybody gets all excited. Oh, there goes the Navy SEALs and the Green Berets and Delta Force and all this. Super exciting. Yeah, but on the big scale of war, that's like a nothing sandwich, right? Now, I know if you're in one of those units, it's a big deal. I was in one, right? It's a big deal when you're in it. It's like every war is the biggest war in the world when you're in it. Trust me. But when you look at war, what's happening now is a war for the planet. Now, this is an old war. It's been going on a long time. So what we see happening right now, and I'm going to get to the point here soon, it's very important. The war that it's a battle for the planet, which has been going on since biblical days, right? Routes, resources, and ideology. I just got off the phone with a preacher actually in Wisconsin, right? Like 10 minutes ago. And we were talking about, and we were talking about these holy spots around the world, of which I've been to many of them. They're always at critical routes and resources places, right? So everything comes together, right? Often these super holy places where you got 3 or 4 or 5 religions all fighting over the same spot, like you might get in India and Varanasi or whatever, where I spent a lot of time as well. These holy spots that multiple religions fight over will inevitably be something else going on there, right? So it becomes a convergent spot, right? And so stigmergic often, right? And so what I'm getting to is now what's happening is the major maritime choke points in the world, which would be Hormuz is so important, Turkish Straits, of course, Strait of Gibraltar, Suez, Bab al-Mandeb, which could be closed at any moment, Malacca, if that closes, that's going to be a massive deal, right? Danish Strait, where we just spent a month up in that area looking at the Baltic and the Danish Strait. So you look at these things, Panama Canal, if you control these things, this is a fight over these chokeholds and over these routes and resources. However, there's another component of the fight going on. And that is one component of these oligarchs who are fighting. This is a centuries-long war. You can never understand what's going on now by looking at what's going on now and focusing on the Strait of Hormuz, or focusing on Iran, or focusing on Israel. You'll get confused. You'll have no idea what's going on. That's like focusing on your toes when you're in the middle of a huge riot, right? It's like, you're not gonna understand and who's causing the riot and why is it being caused, right? What you're seeing, one of the oligarchical components here wants to make global depopulation. That's what controlling the farms are about, what you talk about all the time, right? You talk about all the time. They're controlling the farms with the seeds and with what are they doing with this glyphosate now and all these?
Supposedly, with the amount of lawsuits going on that could bankrupt full nations, at the amount of monies that would be settled, the settlement would eclipse GDPs of smaller nations, and the damage they've done, not only to the ecosystem but to the human domain as well. I mean, this stuff never should have been put into our food supply. It's still, and now it's been deemed a national resource that we have to continue to use it, and they use it dry. Originally, it was just for weed mitigation, but now it's used as a drying agent itself. So instead of having just a smidgen of it on it in the beginning of the season to try to wipe out the competitive weeds while you're just seeded, so they have an advantage to come up above that weed canopy. That's what it originally was used for after they churned the GM crops. But now it's used in that application and also to dry off. So you're getting it at heavy levels when you're drying it off. I mean, saturation rates that you consider that chemical weaponry in our normal food supply, which should be, that's a whole
Well,
nother discussion for a different day. And, if I could add on there, with the routes and the resources, will we talk about global currencies as well? Because what I'm looking at as well is this is a direct opposition to stop BRICS in its very infant form before it can grow into anything else. And, there's so many levels and so many layers of this. You're right. I mean, how many layers of an onion are. We'd have to go back to the 1640s maps to even make sense of who was in power at that time and why these situations have evolved over 3 or 4 centuries.
I've got a lot of those maps here, originals. It's
Yeah, right.
unbelievable.
These ancient
But they're,
maps again. Look
yeah,
where look at Khyber Pass, another one.
yeah,
Like, look at where everything flowed through in the ancient trade route times. I mean, and
yeah.
if I might say, look at the Silk Road way out. If you're heading west in China, out in around Xinjiang and that whole area, that used to be oases out there that had forests and fields, and now it's all just dry desert. So you can see the climatological shifts over multi-millennia as well. And you just have to wonder if one of these climatological shifts is back again that would disrupt food production, and there would have to be an excuse for decreased crop yields. And boom, lo and behold, we have an excuse for decreased crop yields. It wasn't us. We didn't have to warn you. It was those bad people over there that we told you we're going to take over the planet. There's something else way deeper on the layering here than what they're presented with to the average person.
Oh, right. And that's why you have to understand how the gator hunts, right? And first of all, that we're looking at an alligator, right? I used to hunt alligators. That's why I use that as an example. When I was a kid, I used to eat them, right? So, and I would catch them with my hands, and I would shoot them, and I would catch them with rod and reel and all kinds of stuff. And so I was like half wild boy, right? So
That's a
when I
skill
went to
set to
Army,
continue to have, if I might interrupt. That is a skill set you're going to need to have. Hunting, capturing, trapping. Like, you got to go back old school. We need to go back to 1860s pioneering lifestyle, at least for this next chapter. You're going to have to be really innovative for your food sources. And thank you for bringing that up. There's iguanas and gator and all these things people don't know how to eat. They don't know how to process, don't know how to even cook it. So you get your, innovative hat on cuisine and available cuisines that nobody else is going to touch. They're going to walk by it, and that's food. So know what those resources are.
I was just talking with Misako yesterday about that. We were talking about rabbit hunting when I was in rabbit starvation and that sort of stuff. But we were talking about rabbit hunting when I was a kid in Florida. And I knew when to. We went to see a bear hunter here in Japan twice. We spent a lot of time with him. He's killed this year like 50 bears already. 50, right? So, I mean, there's so many bears out in Japan, right? They're unbelievable. They're all over the place. But at one time, like a couple of years ago, we were up seeing him. He's a farmer. He's a rice farmer. But he's like, most of the people, they like to go bear hunting. He's like, I don't go bear hunting. I go to get a bear, right? He's like, we're sitting on a bear skin rug on the floor and eating bear with chopsticks. Very good too. And that's when I used to go rabbit hunting or gator hunting when I was a kid. I didn't go just to go hunting. Well, at first you do when you're in the beginning, but later when I would go to get a rabbit, I didn't go to go rabbit hunting. I literally, like my grandmother was going to cook supper or whatever, and I'd be like, "Hey, let's have rabbit tonight. Is that okay, Granny?" She's like, "Oh yeah." So I'd grab the single shot gun and go out, and like I would have a rabbit within 10-15 minutes. I'd have it cleaned up. 20 or 30 minutes, I'm giving it to her in the stainless steel. I'm giving her the meat in the thing, and she's cooking it. I mean, we're eating the rabbit in like an hour. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just like normal. I know when to hunt a rabbit. After it rains, they're going to come out and eat the nice grass, and then that's a good time to go get them. And I'm from Florida. It was raining all the time. So, but what I'm getting to is what we're going into now is understanding how the gator hunts. First, we're looking at a gator here, right? And we are looking at a gator that wants global depopulation. So this is not about controlling the Strait of Hormuz. That's just some component, but it's really about, and I've published this many times. I think the Strait of Hormuz would be closed, but it will be the Zionist forces that want it closed, and they'll blame Iran. Right now, it's playing out in the way that it has. It's emerged. Iran is allowing some to go through. I think some Indian ships just went through and that sort of thing, and which is good. But at the end of the day, they want global depopulation, right? So that's why we see the fertilizer plants burning down all the time. Just another attack in Russia on fertilizer plants, Nord Stream cut, Groningen cut. All they're systematically turning screwworms. That's how we predicted screwworms. We predicted screwworms about maybe 4 years before they came back. I mean, in writing, we were predicting these things in writing and in interviews that the screwworms would come back. And how do we do this? Because we know what they want to do, because they say what they want to do. They actually say it. I'm not reading their mind. I'm reading their stuff, right? And they're really clear about it, like removing the water infrastructure around Europe and different places. They're doing this with great intent. What I'm getting to is there's not going to be they're shutting out the lights on a lot of the food production. When the music stops, there's just not going to be enough caloric chairs, right? There's not going to be enough nutrition. Some people are just going to starve to death, and that number is going to be huge. Now, starvation causes HOP, human osmotic pressure, the push and the pull of migration. So that human osmotic pressure, that's why I spend so much time in the Darien Gap. I've been across the entire U.S. southern border, and I spent about a year in Panama. Much of that time was out in the jungle in the Darien Gap. I was in the Darien Gap warning before it was a big deal. The reason it became a big deal is because Masako and I, we took 60 or 70 people down there. We took like congressmen and Brett Weinstein and Chris Martinson and all kinds of people, right? I think I invited you a couple times,
You
and
did, and I
you
should have
couldn't
taken you
go.
up on the offer, but again, looking back in the past on things, living a life, should take those chances anytime you had a chance, because I had a chance to go with you and I didn't, and now I'm kicking myself in the ass for not going with you there.
The reason we were there so much is because I thought we're going to end up with famines, and this is going to end up being a main invasion route, right? And because once you get to anywhere in South America, you can then get through the Darien and you can get to the United States, and you can take over places like Panama as well, right? So if you can just Camp of the Saints style on ships, get from Africa over to South America, which a lot of them have already done, right? Huge amounts. We've got records of over 1 million people that came through the Darien Gap. I mean, passport numbers, the whole works, right? Now, the human osmotic pressure that'll be created by these famines will be, I mean, Europe is essentially done. I've spent about 7 years in Europe. I've been all over Europe. I lived in Poland. I lived in Germany. Ich spreche Deutsch eigentlich, right? I speak German. I've been all over Europe. We were just in Sweden and Norway and Denmark, and we were at the Danish Strait. That's why we were in Denmark. And the reason we were in Norway and Sweden is because we were looking at the Baltic. We were in Denmark because we're looking at the Danish Strait, which I think that will close, right? We were in Hamburg because it's the biggest port in Germany, the third biggest in Europe, because I think something will end up happening to Hamburg, right? And likewise at Rotterdam. That's why I've talked about Rotterdam and Antwerp. I think these will all be targeted because what they're doing is shutting out the lights. They'll cause this starvation. You see the draft that they're talking about with the military now, right? Up to the age of 42, they're talking about now. That's how this game goes. This is not. I was in special forces, right? What does special forces do? Special Forces was designed after World War II. The OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, was dismantled, and they created the CIA and Green Berets, right? I was a Green Beret. So what did the CIA and Green Beret do? So very similar. The Green Berets were the military part of it, and the CIA was sort of military and part of, intelligence. They both overlap quite a lot. That's why you see a lot of Green Berets go off into the intelligence world, right? So, but what I'm getting to is, what is one of the main functions of Green Berets is to raise a foreign army, right? De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. You give it a Latin name, it sounds like it's super official, right? But in reality, it's about raising foreign armies, right? And so the United States has done this. CIA, Special Forces, and SEALs do it now. Different components of SEALs, right? There's different components of the U.S. military that do this now. But that is what'll happen within the United States. This is common war. This isn't new to the United States. The Romans did it. I mean, this is like this is. I mean, I got a whole section on Romans doing stuff like that, right? It's like the Romans were big on that, right? And so this is nothing new. There is nothing new under the sun. Famine as a weapon of war is old. It's biblical, literally biblical, right? And and the Irish, I mean, they've never recovered from those Victorian, well, let's say Victorian famines unleashed across the world, like India, Bangladesh, down in Africa, right? The Victorian famines were sort of a famine weapon system developed. They call them Victorians because the British were doing it. They're not the only ones that have done it. But you talked about currency. I mean, currency is a big part. Money systems are a big part of warfare. Obviously, I hear people saying all the time that all wars are bankers' wars. I was just up with David Webb actually in Sweden. David's a very smart man. He's talking
That
about the
book will
great
scare you
taking.
if you read that book. You won't sleep for a week after reading that book, The Great Taking. And you're talking about David Rogers Webb.
Oh yeah, David Webb. And so the great taking. So we talked all day and we chat almost every day now. I mean, the guy is really smart, right? Like you. I mean, I listen to, if he's talking, if you message me, I'm like, boom, it's the first thing I'll answer, right? Because there's certain people that have their fingers on different pulses and I'm trying to monitor and figure out what this beast is doing. But we were talking in Sweden at a nice big wooden table like this one. And David mentioned that all wars are bankers' wars. And I'm like, I mean, actually, the paradigm is off on that one, and this is important, right? And I mentioned it to David, and then he saw it immediately, right? They're not, all wars are not bankers' wars, right? That's a saying, but so we have to get that little tweak in there because there were big wars long before banks ever existed, right? So it's not like all wars are, since the advent of aircraft carriers and submarines, or all since metal ships, all wars are naval wars. I mean, all maritime. Not really. I mean, those are emergent. Like the banks emerged, right? So they're an emergent weapon system. They are definitely used as a weapon system, and there's a feedback loop. I mean, part of the so the banks are a huge part of wars, but that not all wars are not bankers' wars. It's important to get that right. And
Hey, so Michael, while you broke there, let me ask you a question then. So targeting, you were mentioning about Green Berets, targeting, obviously, what targets you're going to be hitting and for how long duration you want to take them out. I've heard you speak about that. Like when you're looking and taking helium production offline, you're taking aluminum production offline, you're taking natural gas production, and not just like taking the plant down and closing it because you're scaring people from coming to work. You're actually destroying it where it takes 3 to 5 years to rebuild just the very infrastructure to give us the very basics for the manufacturing on the planet. I mean, wind that out when you're talking about this entire scenario here. This is a long-term disruption meant to be an extremely long-term production or disruption in production.
permanent.
Permanent even,
They
yeah,
plan to
even,
have
yeah.
they plan to have fewer people and control the remnant. They don't hide this. This is not conspiracy theory. This is them talking. This is them in action. Them. One of the main oligarchical components is the Zionists. Now, Zionists are a multifaceted thing. It's like saying Catholics. I mean, what's a Catholic? I don't know. I mean, we can get all. One time when I was in the Iraq War, I said, you know what? I've been studying this a long time, and I don't even know what an Arab is, right? And some people piled on. They're like, he doesn't even know what an Arab is, and and I'm like, do you know what one is? Because go ahead, I'll give you 2 hours, right? So, you know what I mean? Have fun. Define an Arab where I can't poke a hole in it in the first 10 seconds, right? It's like, but because and a hole that will everybody will see as truthful, right? What is an Arab, right? What is a Zionist? Actually, it gets quite complex. Let's say the British intelligence used Zionist as a Pinocchio to get control to make Israel to get control of the Suez Canal, right, and other things in that area because it was a resource-rich area, right, and so that became the Pinocchio. One of the things about Pinocchio is strings go both ways, and often, and when you're making these puppets, which that's what Green Berets and a lot of CIA people do. The whole Green Berets is based on doing this, making Pinocchio countries, right? Pinocchio armies, right? So that you control the strings. Now, in the 7 phases of a U.S. sponsored unconventional war, and all the Green Berets, or at least from my era, will know exactly, from several generations, will know what I'm talking about. I don't know if they still teach this, but the 7th phase of a U.S. sponsored unconventional war is transition. And that's what they call it now. We used to call it demobilization, right? And demobilization is when you try to make Pinocchio stop fighting, because Pinocchio grows. When Pinocchio was in the book, which I've got the original book here, actually, this is very interesting. The carpenter was going to make a table leg out of the piece of wood, and it goes, ouch, and the thing screams. Next thing you know, he anyway ends up making a wooden doll out of it. The doll comes to life, and the first thing that the doll does is attack the maker, right? The first person Pinocchio attacked was the person who made it. That's what often happens. Zionist was created as a Pinocchio to control the Suez Canal. Period. Full stop. They were a political entity. That's why they were selling these stocks. This one actually, it's got a stamp on it from 1913, right? There's the stamp, if you can see it, 1913, right? But this is an 1899 share warrant, but it was actually issued in 1913. You can see it right there. I bought this. I found it in an antique store that a Jewish guy has in Panama City. In fact, I bought like all of his books, all of his old books. I was wheeling them out. It took carloads to get them out. I made a library out of them, right? It's unbelievable. I'm like, treasure trove. And I found this. And then I put it in this frame. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. It's like, I found one of those. And so, but what I'm getting to is that's forming these colonies actually is normal. That's how my family came to America. In 1609, they were coming over to the Virginia Company. They had sold shares like this. I wish I had one, but you know what I mean? They were 1609. They were actually the Virginia Company started earlier, more like 1603ish, right? Something like that. And so but my family started to come over in 1609. They got shipwrecked. They were on Bermuda. These colonies, they would raise money and sell shares, and that's how they did them, right? My family got shipwrecked on Bermuda in 1609. They made new ships and they made it to Virginia. They made it to Jamestown in 1610, right? And in fact, the Easons, E.A.S.T, is my mother's side. They're listed, and that's my family, right? So my family came over just the way these people went to Israel. They raised up a bunch of money and went to and made a colony. This has happened all over the world. That's why let me say a few other things. That's why the Scottish are part of the United Kingdom today, right? Because when Christopher Columbus and others started bumping up against Panama 500 years ago or so, they started, hey, this is really important place, Panama, right? They soon realized Balboa and all that, this is really important. Balboa was the first one to spot the Pacific, apparently, and that's why his face is on the $1 coin down in Panama now, the Balboa, right? So he was the mayor, he was the governor of Darien, actually the first governor of Darien. He was killed in Darien later by the next governor. And so but Balboa, and when he spotted the Pacific, they called it the South Sea, because Panama kind of goes east west, not north south. Anyway, but so he was looking south at the Pacific. In any case, what I'm getting to is when you get to the 1690s, all these people tried to make a path between Panama, routes and resources, right? They were trying to make a path between Panama. Many people. So the Scottish show up. We can do it. And the Scottish are pretty hardcore people, super smart. They came over to Panama and they sold shares. Similar, they sold shares. It was called the Darien Scheme. There's a book about it. There's quite a few books. I've got quite a few of them. So they still have an old fort down there, but you can't drive to it. It's way out in the jungle, right? And so the Scottish were trying to make a path between the seas in the 1690s through Panama, routes and resources. So they were making that colony down in Darien, and they raised a bunch of money. They went down there. The British were like, or the English were like, we can't have this happen because, if they have a path between the seas, they're going to start to, the Scottish are going to throw some shade on the English, right? Because they're going to really be able to do some serious stuff. So the English and the Spanish started fighting back on the Scottish. Anyway, so let's get down to the point where 2,000 Scottish are dead, 2 missions to the Darien, and they're bankrupt, right? 2 missions, 2,000 dead. And that's when they were bankrupt. Scotland was bankrupt, and they got absorbed into the United Kingdom. That's why the United Kingdom exists today. That's why it's the United Kingdom of England and Scotland, and not the United Kingdom of Scotland and England. Because if Scotland had succeeded in Darien, maybe they would have been the one absorbing England at some point, right? There's a good chance of that. Routes and resources, right? Colonies all over the world, they would sell shares for, right? That's why. And so, it goes on and on and on. French trying to build a Panama Canal, they went bankrupt. Then the air said, we can do that thing. But the problem is Panama was part of Colombia at the time. So November 3rd, 1903, we sponsored a rebellion, and that's when the Republic of Panama was born. It was November 3rd, 1903, so that we could make the canal. We immediately, with that new Panama that we created from a rib of Colombia, we then got into an agreement that we took a swath right through the middle of Panama so that we could create the canal, which opened in 1914, right? So we have run a puppet government in Panama ever since, and then we gave the canal away. Now, for how it really affects us is these energy supplies are being permanently cut off, for our purposes, permanently cut off, right? I mean, they're not going to be turned back on in 10 years. We're talking blowing up multi-tens of billions of dollars stuff. We're talking desalination plant. I think one in Kuwait just got hit, right? They're shutting off the water. So they're depopulating those places. I spent a lot of time in that part of the world. I was in Kuwait quite a lot. I was in Qatar. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates picked me up one time in Afghanistan, flew me over to Bahrain in the C-17, and took me to the Fifth Fleet headquarters and introduced me to Admiral Gortney. He was the guy. He was the Fifth Fleet commander at Bahrain, right? So Fifth Fleet, U.S. Navy Fifth Fleet, and I was there with Secretary Gates, who had just picked me up in Afghanistan, and we're talking with Gortney there. And you know what place just got blown up was that Fifth Fleet headquarters recently, right? Got blown up by allegedly Iranian munitions. I have no idea who's doing it. Now, this is really important, super important. What I'm saying now. Main targets in this war are not just Iran. They are Israel and the United States. I know that sounds kooky to a lot of people because they don't know what's going on. But for that 1% of 1% of 1%, you know what I'm talking about. So when we're talking on the big scale, the much bigger scale, the grand strategic scale, not strategic scale, but grand strategic scale, and this is what almost all the analysts miss, is the grand strategic scale. They don't even seem to realize it exists, right? They don't seem to realize there's another scale above strategy, and it's called grand strategy, right? And there's only very few people. Most governments don't even pay attention to grand strategy. George McMillan talks about it all the time. I asked George McMillan to come down to Panama with me. He spent, I don't know, maybe he came down there twice. We must have spent a couple of weeks together. I mean, we meet in Texas sometimes, and we just lay out the big maps and talk for hours and days, right? George McMillan all he does is grand strategy. That's why I invited him to Panama twice, right? We were out in the Darien Gap and, out in the jungle and all looking at maps, and I'm just hit play on George and let him go. You know what I mean? I'll introduce you to him if you want. But when it comes to grand strategy, George gets it. Like when I say, yeah, they're targeting, Israel, he's like, of course. It's like, and because this is all he breathes is grand strategy, right? And so what's happening? So what
Hey, Michael,
is
let me
happening
stop you
now?
for a sec. Can I ask a question then? So, how many of these resets have taken place previously in the past since the Roman era? Obviously, many of them, because we're talking about the same players, the same moneyed families, these same wider, above, 30,000 foot looking down on this battlefield. And then moving forward, then what are going to be the new absorption regions that you see? Because this is just recycling. If you go back 300 years and you look at the map, it's very different, but it's the same moneyed families in those same areas of the planet that are still in control, that have allowed the break up into smaller and smaller regions for more control. But it seems like everything's going to reconsolidate back up here again. And again, how many resets have there been previously on this? You're talking grander scale of things for movements, but then which regions are going to come back together and sandwich into new, larger, oligarchical controlled regions, as we see the Club of Rome 1973 map when they're talking about the 10 regions of the planet. Are we going that direction where there's going to be 10 large oligarch controlled regions and that's it, versus the countries of 190 countries that we see today?
Why don't I introduce you to George McMillan? It's like, and because he and I talk about this for days on end, and this is all he does, right, for years and years. And so, but let's let George talk, because in fact, this is inspiring me to call him up as soon as we hang up. So, but they're clearly dividing it up. That's clear. But there can be only one, Highlander stuff, right? There's clearly people that want to rule the world, right? This has been going on since I don't know when it started. I mean, it's at least biblical, right? I mean, that's why, the Bible is basically a survival manual. It's like, it's all these things have been forewarned. And so, but what I'm getting to is when it comes to Israel now, I was just talking with a friend of mine. We were chatting last night. He's in Israel. He's a former IDF special forces guy, actually. I know him from India, actually. So I've known him for years. And we were just chatting last night about what's going on. And I was telling him, I think they're going to destroy Israel. And, he's asking me for basically my thesis on that. And I said, that this is what I think is happening, right? Because remember, Israel was only created by Zionists they were organic, but they were also created. They were then, let's say, nuclearized by the British intelligence, and then U.S. took over later, right? And but they're the Pinocchio that's overstayed its welcome. Like Pinocchio, when Pinocchio grows, because the puppet grows heavier and heavier on the strings, but sometimes when the boy runs off the strings, they kill it, right? Or sometimes the boy runs off the strings and actually it just pulls the string master down and now it's the master, right? So sometimes the Pinocchio does grow to a certain point that it takes over, right? So these things happen. You make a fire, but the fire, consumes the arsonist, right? I mean, that's how this stuff really goes. I've got a book up here on the Turks, the Bulgarians, and the Greeks swapping population components, right? And it goes through the legal ways to do it and the information war ways to do it. It's 1932, right? It's old stuff. And that's actually a new book. 1932 is like, might as well have been printed this morning. The ink is still wet. So, I mean, so it's like, this is the same stuff. Like right now, Israelis are moving over to Cyprus. They're talking about buying islands over there. Where are they moving in Thailand? A lot of Israelis are moving down to Patagonia and Argentina and all that, but a lot are moving to Thailand. I've been down to Argentina looking at this, right? That's strategic. China wants Argentina as well. They got a big military base down there, satellite space stuff, and all kinds of stuff. I mean, the Chinese, right? But now let's go to Thailand. Thailand. You got to go to Thailand. On Koh Tao, a lot of Israelis are moving to Koh Tao. Why are they moving to Koh Tao? Well, I've been to Koh Tao and I looked at it. Koh Tao is, let's talk about routes and resources. You see that fight that's happening between Thailand and Cambodia, allegedly about that 1907 map and the Praver temple. It has nothing to do with that temple. That's like, the idea that we're fighting Iran because they killed 30,000 people, which was told to us by people that only lied to us. But the thing about the Praver temple and the Cambodia Thai border, the fight, you see Thailand's building a sort of a wall there right now. Keep in mind, I used to live in Thailand. I wrote the last 2 pages of one of the prime minister's book. The Prime Minister Abhisit. I wrote it. I didn't write the book. I wrote the last 2 pages. He gave me the last 2 pages. And it's called The Simple Truth is the name of the book, right? The Simple Truth. It's in English. So if you find The Simple Truth, you'll see I wrote I'm kind of dialed into Thailand. I've been all over Thailand. Why have I been all over Thailand? Thailand is the hyphen in Indo-Pacific security, right? Thailand is very important. That's why the United States invested so much in Thailand for so long, generations, right? But Thailand is very important. That's why the Japanese invaded Thailand in World War II and were a major, and actually Thais and Japanese love each other then and they love each other now. This idea that everybody hates Japan is utter nonsense. You're in the country that you're in now, they love Japan, generally speaking. In fact, I was just over at some memorials and where you're at. So it's about 4 or 5 months ago. But anyway, what I'm getting to is Israelis in Thailand. Why are they at Koh Tao? Well, I haven't seen anybody say this because it just occurred to me recently. Because I'm like, why are they at Koh Tao? It could be because they're just escaping. That's not how they roll. Because they're going to do what I do, which is multitask. They're going to try to do several things at once. They're going to pick, farmland that's also next to a river that can get to the sea, that sort of stuff, right? They're going to do that sort of thing. They're going to pick an escape place that also is strategic because that's how they roll, right? Because they're smart, right? And so, or at least the masters are smart. So they're moving to Koh Tao, right? Koh Tao is in the Gulf of Thailand, the Gulf of Siam. This is important, and it deals with that fight I was mentioning earlier with the Cambodians and the Thais on the Praver, which is way away from the Gulf, but it's all part of the same fight. They the Chinese want to build a canal from the Mekong River through Cambodia. It's called the Funan Techo Canal, right? Funan Techo Canal. I don't know if they're going to finish it, but I think that they probably will eventually. The Funan Techo Canal will allow the Chinese to use the Mekong and bypass the mouth of the Mekong, which is controlled by Vietnam, which is not exactly China's best buddy, right? So Vietnam and China are, frenemies at best. And so if China can build that canal, Funan Techo Canal, it'll go right to the Gulf of Thailand, and then they can go across what's called the Kra Isthmus. The Kra Isthmus. The Kra Isthmus. Kra means turtle in Thai language, right? This is the first time I did a recon of that was about 12 years ago. I mean, of that canal, looking at a route. The people have wanted to build a canal across the Kra Isthmus for centuries, just like Panama Canal. They wanted to build one for 300 years, probably, or 400 years before they finally did it, and in 1914. But what I'm getting to is the Kra Isthmus is harder to build a canal across. If you've ever been there, you know what I mean. The Panama Canal is hard enough. It was very hard. Suez was relatively easy. And then Panama Canal, very difficult. Suez Canal, Kra Isthmus, really difficult. But you can do it. It's just going to be tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars, right? What can you do if you have a canal across the Kra Isthmus? You can bypass the Strait of Malacca. The Strait of Malacca. Now, if you look at the Funan Techo Canal, and you look at all these railways China's building, like through Thailand, to go down the Kra Isthmus, but the Funan Techo Canal will dump into the Gulf of Thailand, and it'll go. You can then do your ship traffic down Mekong or up Mekong through the Gulf of Thailand, across the Kra Isthmus, and skip the Strait of Malacca. That's big. The British they've fought against having any railways and back and forth. Like, the Panama Canal, by the way, started with a railway. It was called the Panama Railway, right? And now they call it the Panama Canal Railway because now the canal was made, like, I don't know, 40 or 50 years after the railway was made, about 50 or so, 60. And so in any case, so first it started with a railway, and first it started with Indians carrying your stuff for you. But what I'm getting to is if you look at where Koh Tao is, where the Israelis are taking, and you look, it's called Koh, Kho, and Thai means island. So it's Tao Island, right? It's near Koh Samui, right? If you go there, you'll look, that is on a strategic path through the Gulf of Thailand between Funan Techo and the Kra Isthmus, where I'm like, that could be a coincidence. And there's a lot of energy out in the Gulf of Thailand, right? So why are the Israelis going to Koh Tao? I don't know. Now, that's one place. Then there's up in Pai in Thailand, which is more North Thailand, right? More in the area of Chiang Rai area. It's called Pai, right? And Pai, Pai, Pai. Why are the Israelis in Pai, Thailand? Well, if you look at the history of Pai, Thailand, by the way, Koh Tao, to my knowledge, was never strategically important, to my knowledge, ever in history that's recorded, to my knowledge, right? But Pai was. That's why so many Japanese were at Pai in World War II, because routes and resources. When Japan wanted to go through Burma over to India, Imphal campaign and all that, they were at Pai, right? Because Pai, I've been up at Pai looking at this. The Thais are like, why are they so many Israelis coming to Koh Tao? Why are they in Pai, right? They're in Pai because that's strategic. But what I'm getting to is there's many people that want to divide Thailand into pieces. China wants to divide it up. I first started realizing the United States wanted to divide Thailand in 2014. At first, I just thought that our State Department was incompetent. I was publishing that. I was writing it because I was in that coup in 2010, and I was in the other one in 2014, and it was pretty serious. And at first, I thought, man, our State Department is really incompetent. And then at some point, I'm like, this is not incompetence. These people are sabotaging our relationship, our very important relationship, our very long relationship. We've had longer relations with Thailand than I think about any country. Actually, Morocco, I think, was Morocco the first country to recognize the United States when we first formed. But we've had very positive relationship with Thailand since 1853-ish, maybe, because Commodore Commodore Perry. Well, actually, let's get to about 1878 when President Grant was there in 1878 or 79. The only two countries he seemed to like on his whole trip around the world, which was like 2 years, was Thailand and Japan, or Siam. They called it Siam back then. He loved Siam. He loved Japan, but all the rest he was like, whatever. I've got all of his original letters, 32 volumes in room 3 of my library. So it's unbelievable. Volume 29, he talks about this stuff. Former President Grant. But what I'm getting to is routes and resources. Grant was over looking at these things. That's why after being an incredible general and after being an incredible president, he went on a world tour on a Navy ship to give him, so that he had, a standing that, I'm not just here, ex-president doing a tour. The Navy's taking me. So he went to all these different countries and he was, he's sussing it out. That's when Manifest Destiny was really growing. Manifest Destiny meets the Great Game, and so, but now it's clear that Thailand is going to be one of the main shows at some point. That's why I spent so much time there. I've been all over Thailand. Thailand is going to be a center of action, I'm telling you. And just like Okinawa, where I was just at again, when China goes for Formosa, when it goes for Taiwan, they're going to go for you got to go for Okinawa, right? And actually, President Grant warned about this in 1879, very explicitly. He's warning the Japanese emperor in 1879, President Grant, when he was in Japan. I've got their letters in the other room. It's in the volume 29 of his letters, actually. And President Grant is saying, there's foreign actors that are going to try to, China and Japan have, some butting heads on Ryukyu, right? Luchu Islands is what we call Okinawa now, right? So they're butting heads on that, but do everything you can not to fight with China. You and China need to find a way to get along. But this is what will happen. He's very clear in his letters. He's writing back and forth with the Emperor of Japan in 1879, President Grant, former President Grant. And he's saying foreign actors will come here. They will get you riled up against China, and China will get riled up against you and get you to fight. And then they're going to, and President Grant is saying, you don't owe much money. Japan has got a really good balanced budget here. You owe very little foreign debt. Keep it that way. He's advising very politely to the emperor, and the emperor is writing back, right? And very politely. And he's saying these foreign actors are going to come. They're going to make you and China fight over Luchu, which is also at this point includes Formosa, Taiwan, and they're going to loan both of you money, and they're going to own both of you. This is President Grant warning the Emperor of Japan in 1879. They're going to get you and China to fight, and then they're going to loan both of you money, and they're going to own both of you. That's what we've done all over the world. That's what our student loans are all about. We got so many students that own so much loans. Debt traps, debt traps, debt traps. You got debt traps for the mice size, that's student loans, and then you got the national size debt traps, which is a giant, elephant trap. But it's the same trap. It's the exact same trap. It's just got more bait on it, right? And the spring's a little harder, but it's all about routes and resources. Once they've got students in debt, then students are their slaves until they pay that off.
No, I'm pulling up a map here because, talking about not bypassing through the Malacca Straits. Like I spent some time in Myanmar buying coffee over there, and Jakpu Port was just going active, where that's in northern Myanmar. They drilled out, or they, dredged out this area around Situe. And then they ran pipes and, 4 separate lines of rails, different pipes going up into Yunnan province and crossed over near the Nujiang Valley. And then they sent it up to Kunming. So this is like a major artery for China to receive oil and goods and then send goods out on ships that don't need to bypass the Malacca Strait. And, you're coming over, if you can get into those mountains, and same thing, if you come over, I wouldn't say, maybe Mae Sot or somewhere, or if you can get further up. Those mountains aren't really right as tall as you think. Like you'd be able to bring some transportation of pipelines, and that's where not so much railroads, but highways through some of these areas right into Thailand. So there's been a lot of conjecture and talk about all this infrastructure that could be built because, coming into the port up at Jakpu in the Sittwe Bay area there, that was already valid. And all they need to do is take a junction line down through and then come over into Thailand on the lower mountain range. And then, you got everything can be delivered. This has been a pipe dream for such a long time, no pun intended with the pipes, but I was looking at the map there and bringing it back up while you were speaking about that.
That's why you see Thailand and Myanmar. I say Thailand is so important. It is, but Myanmar too, and Cambodia. And if you look at Laos, you've been to Laos, I think, right? And so Laos, as you know, China's got that railway agreement with Laos, and it's a debt trap. I don't know all the details. I want to know more about the details of that railway. But I was told in my last trip to Thailand that agreement between China and Laos includes a sort of an ownership easement around the railway, and that so when Laos defaults, China will own so many kilometers on each side of the railway. I mean, this is obviously prime terrain. I don't know all the details. I would like to know as much as possible because that's the same sort of that. Speaking of railways, now the southern route was why we went to war with Mexico, right? That's part of why we went to war with Mexico, and the gas and purchase and all these sorts of things, right? So I mean, what I'm getting to is these railways were happening at the same time that we were doing the reconnaissance of Panama, and Seward ended up going to Alaska, of course, and did Seward's Folly and bought Alaska way cheap. Got a good deal on that one. And at that point they call it Seward's Folly. They're like, why'd you buy all that ice for? I was like, well, I think, geostrategically, it's like, and it was a pretty good move. Well done, Seward. And so, but what I'm getting to is that's when we were starting to recon over here in Japan while we're building the railroads across America, while we're doing the purchases and fighting the Mexicans and all this stuff and all these things happening in the same time frame so that we can routes and resources. I mean, this is rule of the world. The whole United States, my country, and I'm deeply American, is a product. We are a baby. We are a child of globalism. That's why America even exists. Everybody showed up there and fought. You know what I mean? It wasn't very long ago that there was no compasses. Compass was considered like super high tech, secret technology almost, right? In the past, everybody had to, skirt around and hug the coast to go anywhere, before they're like, hey, this thing will actually work at night and on the high seas. You know what I mean? It's very helpful to just be quiet and look at the maps. Just look at the maps, read the books, be quiet, and look at the old maps. And then you start to say, oh, okay, that's why Gallipoli and all this stuff. And that's why, you can see why I think Turkish Strait is going to end up being closed, right? When you start, that's why I think Malacca, these are kind of easy ones, right? Malacca and Panama, these are as easy as it gets. But and I think that, I think that these wars over routes, resources, and ideology, what's going on now is the same war that created the United States. The same war that created us was global domination. We are actually children of that, right? And all these books are ethnographical studies from the Smithsonian. These are originals. This is ethnographical studies of American Indians, all the tribes that they could get their hands on. This is anthropological warfare, actually. You should see these. These books are works of art. But I mean, this is all.
Now, Michael, go back to your maps for a second here. Like, if you go back to some of the earlier rendition maps, especially in the ones you're referencing in the 1400s, you can see they still show deserts across areas in the Middle East, and trees and forests, and even the roots, frankincense root. Like, how did they have all these vast plantations growing frankincense? Like, the climate was radically different, and they try to get you to picture that it was like that 6,000 years ago, when in fact these maps that we're looking at from the 1400s still show vast vegetative zones and belts across the arid regions now. So you're telling me that these flips in climate can happen as little as 200 to 400 years? I mean, complete 180 degree from forest to arid climates. Well, could it not flip back just as quickly from arid to a wet zone again? And I think a lot of people are game playing this out. You're looking at that wider 30,000 foot view off the maps here. What if you knew a larger, more powerful cycle and once in a 4,000 year change in climatological rainfall patterns was coming back over the deserts again? You would want that as prime grow land. 7,000 years prior. You look back and some of these changes of the mega lakes in North Africa there, larger than all of our Great Lakes combined times 5. These are the kind of changes, and now it's bone dry. So they showed vast river systems as little as, say, in the 1600s when the Aksum had passed on, and the Ghana kingdom had been trading, and these remnants were still there from trading literally from over to the Red Sea, all the way overland by river systems and estuary, clear over to west in Ghana. These types of changes had occurred in under 300 to 400 years. So does somebody know something that these changes are coming back again? Speaking of maps, I'm a huge fan of maps. Every time I'm in a museum, I look for the globes like you are. What's under? I'm at the bottom like a geek on the floor, snapping up at the South Polar region. We can get off there, dude.
I was just doing that.
I was just
man.
How'd you get
4
that?
days ago. I was just doing that 4 days ago in Hiroshima to this giant globe. Yes, literally. It's got Sweden. Sweden's this giant country. It's because it's a huge globe I was looking at. And Sweden's a giant country on the top of the globe. Yes. But man, I hope you'll come to Japan, because we'll spread the maps out and spend like when I was in Afghanistan, I spent 2 years there. Afghans told me, they're like, we were at the Dasht Margo, or maybe it was a different desert. Dasht Margo is a desert of death. Anyway, we were down in that southern desert in Afghanistan, which is where the Dasht Margo is. But they were like, this used to be a giant forest. This was a huge forest. And they're like, and now it's nothing. Man, there ain't a tree for 100 miles. More than that. Look on the map. You can, and so I started asking other Pashtun people and Baluch people too. They're like, oh yeah, everybody knows this used to be a forest. And actually, there's this one place down near the Iranian border. What was the name of it? There was I looked at I'm just with a bunch of Baluch people. I'm not even with the military. I'm running around with a guy, actually Tim Lynch. I was there with Tim Lynch, a retired Marine officer. Just me and him. We're running around Afghanistan, and we're with local people. Everybody's like, oh, the Muslims are savages. I spent years with Muslims, man. I was just me and them. You know what I mean? I was just drinking tea and stuff. But we're driving, and I'm like, what are these marks high up on the mountains? Because that looks like water marks. This isn't like mineral. This is like some kind of like all around. Like, did this used to be a lake or something? They're like, oh yeah, it used to be a huge dam like many centuries ago or 1,000 years ago or something. And I'm like, what was the name of the dam? And we found this Russian engineer who was working on another dam. He said, yeah, there was an old dam there a long, long time ago. And we went up to like one fort we went to in Farah province, which was north of that. I went up and I took many photos. I published this. There was this fort way up, maybe it was Zoroastrians or something, but it was way up on the top of this hill. It was a hike up there, and you had a commanding view, but it's nothing but desert. I'm like, where'd they get their water? You know what I mean? And they had a well in there that went way down. A friend of mine that I was in the army with, actually, he got a permit from the Afghan government to send cameras down in there. So I went up there and he sent cameras down, and they didn't find anything down there. But what I'm getting to is, well, they found people had thrown a little bit of trash, but not much, because it's way out in the middle of nowhere. But what I'm getting to is there's these strange forts. There's so many forts in Afghanistan. I mean, big ones, lots and lots of forts. Since if those forts were in the jungle, you'd never see them because it'd just be jungle, But when you're out in the desert, that stuff, you can't tell, is this 500 years old or 5,000 years old? I have no idea. I mean, huge forts, a lot of them. I mean, like proper small cities, right? They're all over the place. I've never seen a book about that or anything. Yeah, so there was clearly, you didn't have those giant forts out there out in the middle of the desert. How are they going to feed all those people? You know what I'm saying?
The same thing with the oases. Now, you could take that line from Afghanistan and draw it all the way through over into Western China, all the way up to Tajikistan, go through everywhere that you're looking at, Kyrgyzstan. It doesn't matter. That whole band up there that is now dry desert was once a thriving, the world's largest trade routes were going through that area that had continuous, they had to support the population, so they had to be able to grow food. They had to have the water resources, waste removal, and, those cities they'd engineered, rivaled basic engineering on the highest levels to be able to have at least the basics where you just didn't have to go out and go to the bathroom in the forest and nature would wash it away when it rained sometimes. They had to actually add physical systems in place. That level of planning, city planning, what we consider logistics today to bring things in and take things out, waste removal and management, as well as a governmental system, a law system, that have everything in place at a very high level for those contiguous, and I mean completely, from Iran as well. That was all part of that zone that went from east to west like that. Now, I'm talking more of these generalized desert areas that have massive
Right.
ruins that we're finding today. But the closer you get back to the coast, it's a little more stabilized climate because you got the sea next to it. So you're always going to have more moisture coming off that. But what
Yeah.
had flipped such a
Mm.
what could cause such a massive shift in climate on something on the multi-thousand year that would turn forests into deserts? Solar activity is probably the only thing that you could think of.